You mentioned before in terms of the position descriptions and that, that let's call it that that induction process when we would go through that. So let's look at position descriptions in a little bit more detail. So what's a good position description look like?
Yeah, great question. Because a lot of people, and I don't disagree, because a lot of the time this is the case, that the PD is a waste of the paper it's written on,
Yeah.
because it provides no value. And I agree, if it's a really poorly written design PD, yeah, may as well not have it. A position description is not a task list. It's not a to-do list. So it's really important that the structure of it is correct to get the value. And for everyone here today and those that haven't been able to join, following this afternoon, you will receive a resource from me that covers this. So it gives you a really clear overview. Basically, you need to just start with the purpose of the role. Why does the role exist? Give a really good overview. The outcomes that you want to get, which basically shows what does success look like, what does good performance. You want to describe clear accountabilities and responsibilities and make sure that they're linked to the business goals, because essentially you only have positions in place to achieve business success. So in our business, for example, we have HR partners. So they're there to deliver the HR services that the likes of the sales and marketing team sell and promote. So define what success looks like is really important, and what a good job is. Include behavioral expectations as well. It's not always about the physical output, of the job, processing tax returns, giving structure advice, for example, but it's about, what expectations we want out of people that hold this role as an accountant, for example. You need to have strong relationships skills, communication, interpersonal, emotional intelligence, because you're dealing with people's, sensitive information, for example. So, that's really important. And make sure that they're simple, easy to understand, not War and Peace 5 pages, not 3 dot points, but quality information that provides value. Because the position description is the document that you're going to refer back to when people want to progress, when people want to challenge the role's not what I signed up for, when people are asking for a pay rise, when people are underperforming, when you're looking at restructures and redundancies. There's so many elements within a business that refers back to a position description. Now, if it is a really poor position description, it's not going to be any use for any of those things I've just said. So it's really important that it's written correctly with the right information to provide value. And like we're saying, having conversations before around someone's development, don't just write it today and then put it in the drawer and never look at it until 3 years' time when you have to rehire that same position.
Yep. 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 So to your point on value, what value do position descriptions bring?
Yeah. The biggest one I personally see is clarity, and it provides clarity for the employee and the employer, or employer and manager, so to speak, because it outlines exactly what they're to do. So, for example, our marketing coordinator now, actually, we reviewed their position description earlier this year because I knew the role had grown, the expectations, that everything had expanded naturally because the business had evolved, naturally because the individual had progressed. So it was time to review and make sure that it's aligned, make the changes, and set expectations in the direction and progression moving forward as well. So it helps with that type of thing, so people aren't feeling overwhelmed. It reduces anxiety and second guessing from an employee's perspective. Um, It's easier for a manager to manage if there's clear clarity position descriptions because it's a really good reference point for all those matters that I mentioned. Pay reviews, performance issues, restructures, promotion, career progression. You want to make sure, as I mentioned before, that the value is it creates better alignment between the individual's goals as an employee and their aspirations and the business goals.
Yes.
Because, yes, as leaders, we're here to achieve business success, but we're here to empower and encourage our team members that report to us. That is a major part of your role as a manager, is to develop that person's skills, knowledge, confidence. And they also can form a good foundation for establishing KPIs, key performance indicators. Now, we'll talk about that later, but when I say a foundation, KPIs are not to be included in a position description, but it's a foundation doc to help build them.
Okay. Yeah, we will. We've definitely we've got a whole section dedicated to KPIs, so we'll definitely come back to that.
Yeah.
One of the things that I love of what you're saying is setting yourself up for success. I think that's such an important message for people leaders to say to their people because that's what it's about. You don't want to set them up for failure.
Oh,
So it's about how do we set you up for success? What does
yeah.
success look like? Let's have a look at this PD and let's work through it. If it does change, and like you said, more than likely, as people grow and develop, it will change. So the constant communication like that, we spoke about before in terms of, what did I call it? Maybe a cultural fallout is a really good one that I mentioned before. It can be such a massive difference whether it's a cultural fallout, cultural killer, or whether it just continues to drive people's success, which then drives team success, which then drives business success.
Correct. And that's why it's so important to keep them up to date. And then you avoid the conversations of that's not my job. That's not in
Yeah.
my pay grade. Um, so yeah, because if you do get those comments and conversations that happen, if you haven't got your up-to-date accurate position description, you've got nothing to fall back on because as we know, everything in HR and employment comes back to process, documentation, and structure.
Yep.
So it's no good me sitting here and saying, "Hey, Paul, well that's your job." Well, actually, no, it's not, Jenna. It's not. We haven't reviewed my PD in 3 years. So yeah, it forms part of it.
Yep. No, it's so important. And I think in terms of, again, the development of our people, I've always said that your people are your number one asset. If
Yeah,
you don't have people to service clients, and if they're not performing at the highest level, well, you don't have a business. Okay, so
100%.
and that's what I've always believed in. That's always what I've led with. And I say that quite openly in team meetings so that they feel valued. That's what we want. So
Yeah,
you're our number one asset. So let's make sure that that works for us, which will then work for the clients and then work for the business. And nowadays,
correct.
sort of we were talking about it offline for a sec there before we went live, Jenna, in terms of nowadays, so many people rely on things like Google reviews. Okay, so uh, that's so important, not only just for customers, but for people as well. If you're looking to
Yeah,
employ someone, the first thing
prospects.
people will go and do is, let me do a search. We've all got our computers, we're on them 24/7 now. So let's have a look at now actually, what do the people say about them? What do their customers say about them?
Correct.
So it's
Correct.
always
And
really good to review.